originally, when Emma invited me to do this, I had a different job title. So now my job title here at CIFAS is Head of Business Engagement. A bit of a name that probably it's quite difficult to know what it really means. But actually what I'm responsible for now at CIFAS is the development and recruitment of our membership from both the traditional and the new sectors. And you'll understand that hopefully more as I go through the presentation. My background is that I've been involved with CIFAS since it started back in 1988. At that time I worked for Experian, and so I was on the CIFAS board because at that time the credit reference agencies in the UK were represented on the CIFAS board. And after I left Experian, I worked as a consultant and then as an employee of CIFAS. So I'm old enough to have been around CIFAS since 1988. So I'm hoping that you wouldn't have any questions that I wouldn't be able to answer. Why I work at CIFAS? Well, during my career, the thing I've really enjoyed working on best is data sharing, specifically with the objective to prevent fraudsters doing what they do. And I've actually been lucky enough to have been able to work within organisations who have allowed me to develop my expertise in that particular field. The challenge of operating in a compliance regulatory framework while also producing operationally effective systems and processes can sometimes be frustrating, and we at CIFAS by no means would pretend that we've got it right yet. But I am actually quite proud of what we have achieved over the 26 years that CIFAS has been around. And I'm really pleased to be sharing that with you this afternoon. But I hope I don't come across as saying, you know, we are absolutely fantastic, everything we do is wonderful. What I hope I can show you is this is a model, this is an example of what can be done to share data to enable fraud to be prevented. And you might find that of interest. Let me just see if I can now, oh, it doesn't want me to go on to the next screen. Let me. Just not letting me go. Emma, is there any? Oh, I'm now the presenter. Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
Lovely. Thank you. So, who's CIFAS? That's what I'm going to tell you. Who are we and who are our members? Then I'll talk to you a little bit about the type of fraud that is recorded on CIFAS, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how it works. I'll then go through what the benefits are for those organisations that are in membership, and then I can talk to you a little bit about what's the cost structure for organisations who belong to our model, and then talk to you a little bit about, obviously the data sharing is the main benefit, but there are other benefits to the sort of model that we operate. Okay, so that's what I'm going to go through. We call ourselves a not-for-profit membership organisation. The not-for-profit is obviously fairly self-explanatory, but that is obviously attractive to the organisations who come into membership. So they all pay us an annual subscription, and that entitles them to be able to access our data, share data with everybody else, and get the value from that and the networking. And everything is based around, if you want to get access to the data and be able to see the data and share data, you have to be a member. So what members share with CIFAS is information on, you know, different definitions, but essentially confirmed fraud. So it's fraud that's proven to quite a high standard. What we say in our rules is that you have to be, it would stand up if you reported it to the police and it went forward through the courts, it would stand up in court. That's what we actually mean by our definition. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but it's fairly key that when you have several hundred organisations looking at each other's data and making important decisions on, you know, whether to lend, whether to continue a service or whatever, that they have a pretty solid understanding of what somebody else means when they filed a case. So that's why in CIFAS we've always been about confirmed fraud rather than suspect fraud. And a fundamental thing that we believe is that fraud is non-competitive. So if you come into CIFAS, it's all about cooperation and communication. We don't sell our data. So organisations that come to us and say, you know, I'd love to get your data, I haven't got anything to share, we have to politely say, sorry about that. So who are our CIFAS members? Well, in the UK, I've said that we've been around since 1988, and we are very fortunate because we have over 300 organisations within membership. All the large retail banks are in, the large building societies. Obviously, we don't have an awful lot of building societies in the UK anymore, but when we set up at first, building societies were a very strong group within our membership. mortgage lenders now rather than building societies, credit card providers, retail credit providers, asset finance companies, insurance companies, factors and discounting organisations, share dealers, and then we put this big umbrella of public sector. Within the UK, the public sector is the holy grail for us now. We have got, as you can see from the membership at the top of this slide, we're pretty well covered with the private sector within the UK. But the public sector, so we mean Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the Department of Work and Pensions, all those sorts of organisations, if they were prepared to come into our model and to share data in our model, then overnight what we can do and what the UK could identify in terms of fraudster activity in the UK would be significantly greater. And it is a source of great frustration to us here that we haven't been able to move quicker within the public sector in terms of bringing them into our membership structure as we would like. Having said that, we have had some success. We have Home Office immigration data that is on our database. So the Home Office provide us with information on those people who are here in the UK but do not have a visa to entitle them to be here in the UK, or those who have absconded, so they know they're here but they don't know where they are. And we have that data. We also have data from organisations like the Land Registry. So there are public sector, the Student Loans Company. So there are public sector organisations who are coming into our membership. But I'd certainly say to Creditinfo, if you were looking to develop a shared fraud model in any market, the real fantastic benefit, if you look at the UK, you know, we may not be typical, is actually to get sharing across the public and the private sectors. And as I say, we're not where we would like to be on that at the moment. So we operate two databases at CIFAS. We have the National Fraud Database, which is our big database. It's the database we've been running since 1988. And on there we have identity fraud, first-party fraud, and application fraud. And we have about 750,000 live fraud cases on there. We're gradually moving out. When we first started, we were able to hold data, I think it was for something like, I think it was about 3 months or something like that. We struggled with the Information Commissioner in the UK to stretch that out to 13 months. And then actually earlier in this decade, we decided to go out to 6 years, largely because credit bureau data in the UK is retained for 6 years, and we felt it was sensible to go in line with that. And we also were hoping that our members would get very good at having the analytics, so we would give them all the data, and then they would be able to look in and say, well, actually the stuff that's really interesting to us is same person, identity, last 30 days, or whatever, you know, but they would have the analytics to know. Again, it has to be said that whilst many UK organisations have great analytical teams, my personal view is that the analytics being used around our data is not as great as it should be, really. So we are actually currently reviewing whether or not moving out to 6 years, because we're moving out to it gradually. Just we're moving from 13 months from 2012. So all new cases from January 2012 that get filed to our database basically don't get deleted at 13 months, and so that means we're gradually moving out to the 6 years. The internal fraud database we launched in July 2006, and as the name says, it's all about internal fraud. So it will be people who apply to UK organisations for employment, as well as people who are employees of UK employers. It's an interesting one. We started it in 2006, as it says there, fraudulent employment applications. The big thing is selling on of customer data within the UK. Obviously, that furnishes an awful lot of impersonation attempts. As you can see there, we're saying we've got just under 2,000 live cases on that database, so you can just see by the difference between the two how much smaller data capture we've got within the IFD. Some of that is because it would be a very sad day if actually the internal fraud database ever did get to the size of the national fraud database. But the other reason is obviously we haven't yet got critical mass in that data set. And it's very interesting because what we have got there is the model that the UK could use for sharing information on employment fraud. You know, all the powers that be say this is a great model. The Information Commissioner, government circles, CIFA, lots and lots of, you know, august FCA organisations say it's a great model. But for HR people, sometimes it is anathema to them, the idea that you would share information on your employees in such what they perceive as a derogatory database. And also, some organisations will say, if I'm going to spend £4,000 to join you so that I can file data to the internal fraud database and get it back, I need to know that you're going to save me £400,000 a year or whatever. And at the moment, we launched in 2006, we're not at critical mass. So in terms of how we sell that concept in the UK, what we're really still saying, hopefully we say it politely, but to decision makers we're saying, we've created the model. If you populate it, we can tackle internal fraud in the UK. If you choose not to populate it, we can't. But don't complain to us too much. But hopefully we do say it quite politely. So they're the two data sets that we have. Let me talk a little bit now about what's on them. So the National Fraud Database, this will be the customers of the banks, the insurance companies, all of the organisations that are in membership. And you can see there that the biggest percentage of our data, I was saying we've got about 750,000 cases on the database, confirmed fraud risk, 41%. Now within confirmed fraud risk actually is information that doesn't come from our traditional members, but comes from law enforcement, comes from the Home Office. We've recently acquired the deceased database from the government department that collates all information on deceased people. Again, the reason we've done that is because identity fraud is a massive problem in the UK, and one of the modes that is used for identity fraud is to impersonate a deceased person. So at least by us having the data there, it does mean, theoretically, if any of our members get an application in the name of somebody who is deceased, we will come back and say, that looks odd. So that's that data set. The next one, which has got a pale blue, application fraud, so nobody can read it. 10% of our data now is application fraud. When we started, 60% of our data was application fraud. Even 10 years ago, 40% of our data would have been application fraud. The phenomenal rise in identity fraud in the UK has, over the last 10-year period, is reflected within our database. So application fraud is literally, I've applied for a facility and, you know, I've lied to try and get it. And we do distinguish between application fraud where the facility was granted and application fraud where the facility was not granted. And obviously when I come on to talk later about how members can see what the value is that they get from our data, what they really want to see is that we prevent an awful lot of the fraud so they don't grant the facility rather than they identify it once it has been granted. Identity fraud, as I've said, that's the massive rise in the last decade. And within the UK, you know, there have been some very, very good schemes that have helped to make it harder for fraudsters to impersonate, but equally we've still got massive vulnerabilities within the UK. Misuse of facility is an interesting one. So, you know, I misused my bank account. You know, I've been written to and I've been told, you know, I'm way over my overdraft, but I just carry on spending. So deliberate misuse we're looking at there. Facility takeover is, in a sense, a derivative of identity fraud. So I have successfully taken over another person's current account and I'm operating that bank account. That would go in as facility takeover. False insurance claims, you can see, is a very, very small dot. And again, it's quite interesting within the UK because the insurance industry in the last few years have invested heavily in setting up their own data sharing for fraud prevention. They set up a thing called the Insurance Fraud Bureau. Oh, might be 10 years ago, but it's sort of 5 to 10 years ago. And now they're just launching. They've been doing it in the last 3 years, but it's rolled out this year, and they've got very ambitious plans. They have a thing called the Insurance Fraud Register, where, as the name suggests, all insurance companies will share information on all the fraud they get. Some insurers are in CIFAS membership, but as a sector, there are some very influential people within the insurance sector in the UK where they are saying, we're not really so interested in fraud from other sectors because we don't really know what it means to us. We only really want to share fraud with other insurance companies because we understand their fraud, whereas actually and it's been very interesting for me because I've been around for so long, when I first went out to insurers to say, I'm just interested, you know, you've joined us, why have you joined us? And people would say to me, well, I don't really know why I've joined you actually, because, you know, your data's not relevant. And I'd go, well, I can understand that if you've got a claim in from me for £2,000 because I've had dropped a glass of wine on a very expensive carpet, I can understand that the fact that, you know, a month ago I tried to fraudulently apply to Lloyds Bank for a £10,000 loan, and I gave them all sorts of lies about my income, how long I'd been at the address, etc., etc. You know, and I'd say to them, I understand that you can't use the fact I lied to Lloyds Bank to not pay the claim. However, do you not accept that the fact that our database will tell you that that individual has a very, very high propensity to not tell the truth, and they're now making a claim to you, that that piece of information could help you to direct that claim into a pot that says it's worth investigating further? And it's been very interesting to work with insurers to find those people within the insurance sector who say, yeah, I agree with you, I'm on that same line of thought. And those in the insurance sector who say, no, do you know, we're not interested in you, CIFAS, we don't want to work with you, we're going to do our own thing. And again, one of the interesting things for us in the UK is that because now the technology exists that you could put multiple data sets on the same platform, and so an insurer theoretically can easily go from the IFR to the IFB to CIFAS to wherever they want to go. Theoretically, it becomes easier now to be able to say, well, look, I tell you what, we'll give you access to the data on the platform, and then it's up to you. But it's quite interesting watching people's mindsets. Well, I find it quite interesting. The second database, as I said to you, is the internal fraud database. And, oh, sorry, I've got database twice there. Apologise for that. And this one is fascinating because in the UK, for example, the Financial Conduct Authority, they say insider fraud is the biggest threat that we have in this country at the moment. And it is quite clear, and I imagine, you know, you will see in the countries that you operate in, some of the fraud that is done, when you look at it and you go back and construct how it was achieved, you come with the conclusion somebody had to be on the inside of that organisation, because how they knew to do that at that time or to do that in that way, the only way you would know that is because you were on the inside and you had access to how that organisation works. So it is a massive problem, but again, it is quite interesting to watch how slowly that database is taking off. Certainly from our board's perspective, they would like to see that growing far, far quicker. If you look at the case types that we have there, some of them are similar. I mean, in application fraud, it's just got employment at the front. Unlawful obtaining, disclosing of commercial data is a small set. Unlawful obtaining, disclosure of personal data is a bigger set. 8% of our data is that. Account fraud, 8% is that. 42% is dishonest action, and that's we're seeing growth in, because what sometimes happens, when I come on to telling you about how everybody has to put fair processing notices into their documentation so that you are advising the applicant or your employee or your applicant for a facility or your customer that you are going to be checking with a fraud prevention agency, that acts as a very, very useful deterrent. But what happened with the internal fraud database often was that organisations would join and say it's much easier getting that fair processing notice into our applications for new employees. That is an easier process than actually getting the fair processing notice into existing employee contracts. So you often found that the dishonest action information wasn't really yet getting to us because of the compliance requirements. But we're starting to see that come in now. And obviously, from our perspective, that is encouraging because the database is becoming a fairer reflection of what's going on. So how does it actually work at the sort of granular level? As already said, we are reciprocal, so you have to contribute data, and you cannot be a member if you don't contribute data. So the way you contribute it is we basically have the members, they identify fraud to the proofs that we have within all our rules and regulations, and then access to Find, which is our database where members log their cases, is basically using internet technology, digital certificates for security, etc. So they will file that case onto the National Fraud or Internal Fraud Database, and then that data is held. And what we do in the UK, which again is an anomaly because of where we came from, when we started in 1988, CIFAS was one man and his dog and had absolutely no central database. And really, CIFAS only got off the ground because the credit reference agencies, such as Experian, where I was at the time, said, we will run the database for you. So each credit reference agency in the UK, and Experian at that time was called CCN Systems, and there was Infolink, et cetera, those credit reference agencies, they all held their version of the database, and the data was loaded to the database with them. About 10 years ago, CIFAS invested in creating our own platform so that we now have our own central database that members log all the data into. But because of the historical relationship we've had with the participating agencies, the way that members access our data is very built into a lot of the processes that they have at the credit reference agencies. So we have left that relationship there because it's how our members want to be able to access the data. So that's how they put it in. The benefits they get is obviously once you're a member and you're putting your data in, then you can, for any new applications, for any new customers, for any existing customers, as long as you have provided the fair processing notice, you can search our database. And so you do that using CIFAS Direct, which is coming to our own platform, or you come through an agency. If there is a match against a CIFAS warning, you get that match. You can then either pull that data back or you can view it on Find, which is CIFAS's system where all the data sits. So how do you match cases? Well, again, when we started, it was all based at address, and we always said, and we wouldn't let go of the fact that fraud, you had to match at address level. And we argued with the information, well, no, we didn't argue, but we debated long and hard with various information commissioners that actually fraud had to match at address level. But interestingly, again, about 10 years ago, what we were getting more and more from our members was, we know you want to hold on to this and it's really valuable, but actually it's a pain for us because we are getting an awful lot of false positives, an awful lot of matches that just quite clearly aren't relevant. So we developed what are called data matching principles. And then these are high-level principles that govern how our data is matched, and it's agreed with the Information Commissioner that that is fair to the consumer. And then the agencies, the credit reference agencies, who are our participating agencies, and we implement those principles as data matching rules. So what I've got here are our data matching rules. So obviously the first thing you will match is this the same person as my customer or my applicant? And so we have a set of individual is same person data matching rules, and there we've given you some examples of it. But what we also know from the work that we do looking at the intelligence that we hold within our database is that quite often, particularly in impersonation or complex fraud rings, the fraudster will know how to impersonate and therefore will use lots of different identities, but quite often they clearly have to have something that relates back to them, and sometimes it will be same contact details, so like an email, a common email address or a common telephone number. I'm coming on later to common bank details. That's often the one where they will want the funds to go into a central bank account or a set of bank accounts. So same contact details is a very powerful data matching rule. Same document reference, that's a bit of a no-brainer as well, isn't it? You know, passport, driving license, etc. I've talked about same financial details, same vehicle. I was saying earlier we have a lot of asset finance companies within our membership, and so for them registration numbers, VINs for vehicles are quite useful to match on. We then have a set of matching rules, which is CIFAS still wanting to hold on to something around the fact that we know, and we've done research to prove this, that actually if there is multiple cases at an address, even if they aren't the same person, there's no same contact, there's no this, there's no that, multiple cases at an address is an indication of increased fraud risk. Recent case at an address is an indicator of fraud risk. And common addresses, what we mean by that is, if there is a case on CIFAS that has got address 1, 2, and 3 in it, and there is within your applicant addresses 1, 2, and 3, but absolutely nothing else is the same, again, you would be allowed to pull that back because there's sufficient likelihood of fraud risk. So those are what our data matching rules are. The way that members access our data, I've sort of talked about this a little bit, but we have a derivative of our data called CIFAS Plus. So when we built our own platform on how members could see get our data, the agencies still wanted to be able to hold our data within their own environment. And so CIFAS Plus essentially is each agency having a copy of our database that sits within their own environment, and they provide access to our data for our clients, for our members who are their clients. And our agencies are Call Credit, Equifax, Experian, and then also within the UK we have Hunter and Syrah, which again are particularly fraud prevention tools that may well be familiar to some of you because they are marketed outside the UK. Each agency, as I said earlier, implements their own version of the data matching rules. And the benefit of that is that, as I say, where you've got processes that are configured already, and they are processes you're very happy with, particularly for new business processing, because that's where Experian particularly have held a dominant position within the market. You just wanted our data to come into your Experian solution, and so it works really, really well there. So that's plus. But we also have a thing called Direct, so that organisations who just want to come direct to us to get the data and have it in their own environment, they can build a direct interface, and that's using XML web service link. You can get the matches directly back, you can use the data matching rules, but as we say here, you can filter, you can forward score, you can prioritise matches, and also there's a batch service available so that you can, you can one-on-one them, or you can just send, I don't know, everybody today where, for example, let's say you have a 1.1% of transactions that look unusual, you might want to batch those out and just send them to us just to see whether there's any activity on our database that does say that's bad. Clearly you wouldn't stop the transaction because the transaction's gone through. What you could do is either reduce the ability to spend on that facility or close the account. CIFAS Portal is a halfway house really, where you're an organisation between Plus and Direct. You're a member and you want to have the direct interface, but you've got no IT resource ever for the next 20 years that's going to enable you to build the direct interface. So you use what we call a direct agency, and they essentially build it for you. And examples of our direct agencies are TraceSmart and Transactis. But again, it's essentially, it's direct where you can't build it yourself. And then Find is, as I say, PC-based, so members input their cases into Find if loading is undertaken manually. It's accessible through the internet, and digital certificates provide all the security to ensure that, organisations can only do what they're supposed to do there. And it's also used by members if you've matched at let's say you've matched at Experian and you've seen that you've matched to case 12345, then that URN of case 12345 you put into Find, and then you get the full details back. And again, there's a batch service available on there. And the other thing we've developed on there in the last 18 months is CaseLink, which is an investigator's tool. And it is essentially saying, you have searched Sue Wishart with this date of birth and this address and this telephone number. We've brought back 6 matches which have got a whole load of other details relating to that person or those addresses, and it will then map those. If those of you who are familiar with I2, it essentially is a mapping process. So it's trying to give you a visual that gives you an early alert to, have you just hit one fraud case, or have you actually uncovered something that could look like a massive fraud ring? And it's just a quick visual of giving you that information. The details that we record for each case, I think this is one of the reasons why we've managed to stay where we are and nobody's managed to knock us off our perch in the UK in terms of what we do. There is a lot of detail within the cases. So I think one of the reasons that is a strength of CIFAS is this fact about it is fraud that's confirmed to a very high standard, so members can be confident of looking at each other's data and feel confidence in what it says. But the other reason that I think we've done well to stay where we are is because, it doesn't just say Sue Wishart applied to Lloyds Bank on the 13th of December for a loan for 5p and she inflated her salary. We will give the type of fraud, the checks made to confirm it, full names, dates of births and roles of those involved, contact details given, bank account employment details given, if documents were involved and it was false documents, the details of those documents, all addresses, and again, within the UK, and I'm sure the agencies elsewhere as well, address linking is a phenomenally powerful tool as well. So the fact that we're holding all addresses relating to that particular fraud, and then also any third party involved, you can see there's a lot of detail within what is going into our database. So what I tend to, one of my mantras when I go out and visit our members is I always say, you know, an awful lot of our members do really well at putting all their data in and checking it all for new applicants, but actually they're not really great at then monitoring existing customers, and particularly where it is something where it's revolving, it just seems to me like a completely missed opportunity, because if we have data that can say to you, look, they still look fine with you at the moment, but our data is saying they are going to go bad at some stage, and you have the ability to actually contain that loss, or completely, as I was saying earlier, in terms of, you know, what you might do after investigation, actually close that facility completely. It just seems to me a real shame that our members don't use our data that way very well. And to be fair to them, one of the reasons they don't is because when you go back to 1988 and when we were built, and the fact that we had to work with the credit reference agencies, and without them we would never have existed, they built it to work very, very well for new business, and it hasn't really, none of us have really done the job we should have done on building it so that it really, really works on customer management. So what are the benefits? Well, our members, those 300 members, what they have to do when they're using the National Fraud Database, we have a rule book. We are horribly bureaucratic. If you ever set up something like this in other countries, I'd certainly say to you one of the things to do is to not be quite as bureaucratic as we are. But all our members every month have to fill out an Excel spreadsheet and send it to us and tell us how much they've saved as a result of using our data. I mean, it's, you know, fantastic, isn't it? You know? And that data tells us that they get a massive saving, and £4 billion of benefits reported in the last years. I mean, to a certain extent, they are real figures because they are the figures that the members tell us. So for that reason, you know, they are good figures. But equally, the more you know about any sort of figures, in my limited experience, but you know, you can use figures to tell your story, can't you? But you know, they are as they are. What that means is that on average, a member will receive £200 of reported savings for every £1 they pay in annual subscriptions. So I mean, that's very attractive, isn't it? But again, what you must factor in is you pay us a subscription, but you then have to have a team of people who are identifying the fraud, who are filing the fraud, and then you have to train people on how to look at our data. So that 1 to 200 doesn't factor in all of the costs you would incur in your own environment for being a member. But I think you can clearly see the fact that we've been around as long as we have, our member retention is fantastic. This thing works, because they wouldn't still be doing it if it wasn't saving them loads of money. The other interesting thing is the networking side. I'll go back to the insurers again, but what the insurers say is the fact that you can network with other fraud professionals in the UK, that is a fantastic value of our service. And one of the other things that has come out of that is that, again, with the insurers, but this is true of other sectors as well, is that if they think they're dealing with a dodgy claim and they really are struggling to prove fraud, but it all feels really, really horribly wrong, there's a thing that we offer, which is an optional service. No member is compelled to do it, but it's called Fraud Check. And you basically have to register on our membership register to say that you will take and you will make fraud checks, but you can phone up another member. So like in the example I've just quoted, the insurance company could phone the bank and just say, this is the name of the customer, this is the bank details they have given us, this is the situation. Can you just confirm to us that that is a live account? And then depending on what those two want to do between themselves, they can network with each other. So that's sort of an informal networking that goes on within our membership. The membership register has got probably about 3,000 people on it from within our members. It might even be more than that, but it's an up-to-date register of everybody who works CIFAS. So going back to the fact we've got 300 members in the UK, you can imagine it's a pretty good tool for telling you people who actively work in fraud prevention, not in the whole of the UK, but certainly in the private sector, and a little increasingly in the public sector as well. We then do business sector working parties. So, for example, the banking sector, 4 times a year, we hold meetings with the banking sector and we talk about CIFAS matters with them, so they can use that as a forum to tell us what we're doing wrong. We will talk to them, so like, for example, contactless cards. You know, they'll say, let's all come and talk about contactless cards. So we facilitate those sorts of sessions. We also have a similar thing with fraud investigators to the business sector working parties. We hold those meetings 4 times a year. We also do regional meetings, because even in a country as small as the UK, and particularly geographically is small, not population, but geographically is small, particularly since the problems with the crash, 2008, 2009, some of our banking members now, they don't let their employees travel very far. So we now, you know, we always used to hold all our meetings in London, whereas now we have regular meetings in Edinburgh, Belfast, Cardiff, and so we will go out. It's all about us going out to the membership. I mean, that's what's great about this model, is members' subscriptions pay our salaries. So we have to keep doing what the members want us to do, because otherwise we don't get paid. And, you know, if you're very member-focused, like you probably get the impression, you know, I love helping organisations prevent fraud. It's a very nice place to work, because it's what we're about. The other thing we've done is we have set up an arrangement. We do work very closely with law enforcement, and we have a team of 6 people. We're only about 37 people in total. 6 staff work within financial crime and strategic intelligence, and they work very, very closely with law enforcement. And again, it was about 6 years ago, the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau was set up under the management of the City of London Police, who are the lead counter-fraud police force in the UK, and intelligence goes into the NFIB from the great and the good in fraud prevention in the UK. So the idea was that they would have this super-duper database that had all of the fraud that was going on, and therefore the UK and law enforcement could get very, very clever at closing down and prosecuting fraud. And it does work, but like all these fantastic ideas, it's like CIFAS, you know, if everybody shared all the data on fraud and it was accessible everywhere, we'd have no fraud. It doesn't work that beautifully. And the NFIB, it's a very good tool, but again, what we did very early on, and this is again one of the nice things for CIFAS, is that the City of London Police came to us and said, you know, would you feed your members' data in? And so for all of our members, instead of them having to go out to those organisations and say, you know, let's pass an act that says you've all got to pass this data in at huge high cost, we were able to say we've set up an arrangement with them, so we're providing your data into the NFIB. And similarly, we work very hard with them. We have somebody seconded into the City of London Police, because what we really want to do is to get them prosecuting the cases where the CIFAS members are getting the biggest hit. And again, we're not as successful as we'd like to be, but you know, we're trying, which is the best you can do, isn't it? The training, we do provide training, both in terms of training on how to use our systems. We have an annual audit that members have to go through every year, so that this is part of our bureaucracy, but again, it's part of what keeps the qualitative aspect of the database. We take a random sample of 20 cases that an organisation has filed, and then we go into them and we say, right, you have to pull, you know, all of the stuff why did you file that case? And then our auditor goes in and actually checks that on that random sample they are complying fully with our rules. We do the same on searches. We check that they've got the fair processing notice everywhere they should have it, etc., etc. So it's a real pain in the neck for the members, but it's one of the main reasons why the whole qualitative aspect of what our databases do, if you talk to people in the UK who use it, they can say the things that frustrate them about it, but they will say it is one of the best data sets we get because we understand it and we can use it with confidence. So the costs of joining an annual subscription, for the internal fraud database, which is the employee one, it starts around £3,500 and doesn't go up very high. If you want to be a full member and use both the internal fraud database and the national fraud database, our entry point is £7,000 a year. It's just under 6,825, but let's say £7,000. If you're a big bank, you are paying us a 5-figure sum. We have 300 members, and our income from membership is around 4 million a year. So that gives you a feel. Subscriptions can be quite high for an organisation, but But again, when I've talked about the benefits, I think you can see why, you know, it does work. When members join us, they pay a joining fee, which just basically cover, you know, because we're not for profit, we just have to make sure we cover all our costs. That's just a one-off fee. The insurance indemnity premium is another thing that underpins what we do. Every organisation within CIFAS has to join that insurance indemnity policy, and what you're all essentially doing is indemnifying each other so that if one member has put something into the database and another member uses that in good faith, totally in accordance with our rules, but they do something that causes Joe Public or whoever in the UK to sue, you know, go through the courts, you know, my life has been ruined because of what happened there. The indemnity is an indemnity for all of the other organisations who are, so it doesn't protect the organisation who put the data in, but it provides the indemnity cover for the organisations that use the data. That might not have been explained very clearly, but again, from a compliance point of view, when you set up these sorts of schemes, we would say you have to have something like that underpinning it. They complete an application form and a deed of indemnity when somebody joins CIFAS. Because we started in 1988, ahead of data breaches and all those nasty things, we got away with that. And because that's always been our model, when people now say to us, our legal people say, here's a 40-word agreement that you have to sign and we have to sign and you have to agree to all of this and that and the other, we happily can turn around and say, no, it doesn't work like that. You fill out our application form, you complete our deed of indemnity, and actually that is the only contract that is between you and us. I don't think anybody setting something up now would be able to get away with that. But and I don't mean that in the sense of we're doing anything we shouldn't, but it obviously is part of what enables us to keep our costs of running this scheme quite low, because we are not in endless conversations about agreements. And one of the reasons we can maintain that model is because we say anything that we do with any one member, we have to be able to do with every other member. So us agreeing anything as a one-off with one member means we've got to go to 299 other organisations and agree it with them. So we're lucky because we have it historically, and therefore we can stick with it. Fair processing notices, I've put here this bullet, include wording to cover the use of CIFAS in applications, agreements, telephone scripts, etc. It's a complete nightmare putting a fair processing notice into anything when you set up as a member. It's the thing that takes the longest for any new organisation coming into membership. But it also acts as a very, very good deterrent, because essentially what it's saying is we will check your details with fraud prevention agencies, and if you provide false or inaccurate information, we will share that information with them. And then it goes on to say, you know, all the things that this data is shared with all these people, etc., etc., etc. So it acts as a very, very good deterrent. There is evidence organisations that are not in CIFAS membership get targeted by fraudsters because they know that those organisations will not get the data matches that organisations in membership will. And then when you come into us, obviously you talk to us about how you're going to get the data, and you do receive training. We will train because organisations have to be trained. One of the other nice things that we do, and that we will be doing more of as we go forward, is our services to consumers. It's always been the case that the reason that the Data Protection Commissioner, as was the Information Commissioner Officer, who as is for years and years, has always watched CIFAS very, very closely, is because the Information Commissioner would have a great concern if, he's a he at the moment, thought that this database was unfairly discriminating against innocent parties in any way, shape or form. So we've had a long relationship with them, and it's sort of turned round now that whereas at the beginning the conversations were always about, you know, that, there is the fact we've been going for so long, and, you know, I'm not saying that we don't have complaints. There's a whole process that deals with how complaints are dealt with. But, you know, we haven't ever had to use, for example, the indemnity policy has never had to be used. So now, well, actually for quite a while, we are doing quite a lot of proactive good things for consumers. So protective registration is a service that we offer so that, for example, if I'm out and my wallet gets stolen from my jacket sitting in a busy commuter train, for example, and so I report my wallet has been stolen, some of the organisations whose cards will have been lost will be CIFAS members, the majority will be, so they will write and they will say, if you want protective registration, because your identity is now compromised, we can put protective registration with CIFAS, and that will mean if the fraudster goes to try and secure something or take over your facility, there will be checks that stop him getting access, him or her, getting access to what he wants, and he will have to get through those checks before he'll get access. So it protects the genuine from the fraudster using their identity. Similarly, those checks are also put in so that if the genuine wants anything, he or she has got to go through those checks as well. But clearly, if you're the genuine, you know you will get through them. And certainly when I have had my identity compromised, obviously it's because I work in counter fraud, but actually the feedback we get from people who don't work in counter fraud is, you are so outraged that these people are doing these things. The fact that you have the slight inconvenience of having to do a few more ID checks, you are totally satisfied because you think, well, at least that horrible, horrible person is not using my identity for criminal gain. The other thing that we've done in the last 18 months is worked with local authorities in the UK so that local authorities hold registers, and I haven't got the right terminology to hand, I haven't got it with me, I apologise, but essentially on people who are registered as being vulnerable. So this could be people with a mental or a physical incapacity, and they have carers who are provided to them for social purposes, and so they register those people as vulnerable so that, again, they cannot have their financial details compromised by a carer or a close family member or a friend or, you know, somebody who just comes into contact with them. And that initiative is called Protect the Vulnerable, and that's something that we're working with 6 local authorities in the UK now who register their vulnerable individuals with us, but we are rolling that out to all local authorities. So again, we're trying to do more and more work about protecting people's identities, and we're also issuing advice on how to avoid being duped. So, you know, we've done guides on, you know, why you really shouldn't be a money mule, you know, providing personal data to a fraudster, you know, how they con you and how to stop it. Having said that, we are you know, one of the real challenges there, I think, is how you use social media for those sorts of messages. We're very, very good still at producing best practice guides that essentially are downloadable off our website, but they're still documents. And you think, actually, really, we've got to get much, much cleverer at how to put that information out in a way that the vulnerable people can actually read it and take it on board and use it. So I've done a massive run through, talked and talked and talked, you poor souls. I don't know if there are any questions, or I've just completely dumbfounded you. Yes, I can. I've got a question here. Can I describe what counts as application fraud? If somebody embellishes their salary, does that count as fraud? The quick answer is yes, it does, if somebody does embellish their salary. If you rounded it up, that wouldn't count. But if I'm just now, I did actually have my rules here. Application fraud, I won't read the whole thing to you. It occurs when an application or proposal for any facility, including an insurance policy, is made with one or more material falsehoods in the information provided, including deliberately misleading the member by dishonestly giving information known to be untrue or incomplete, where the dishonesty is intended to deceive the full member into providing an advantage to which they are not entitled. There's a lot of other stuff there, but does that help, Ricardo? Hope so. Anything else? Thank you, Ricardo. You've got my email address there, and actually I haven't put www.cifas.org.uk. That's our website. But, you know, come back with me with any questions at all or anything. I find this quite fascinating, you know, this whole ability to talk to people in other countries, you know, what you do in Creditinfo. So, you know, anything you want to talk to us about, you know, do come back to us.
So I've got a question. You said that the ID fraud had increased and application fraud as a percentage has gone down, but I'm assuming overall you've seen in terms of numbers, an increase in fraud. Would that be true?
Yes, and I might have misled there. The percentage of application fraud has gone down. The actual numbers of application fraud have not gone down. It's just as a percentage of what we have, because identity fraud's gone up so much. Where I was saying we're now 750,000 cases, we get about, from the membership, we get about 23,000 new cases every month coming in. That's purely from the, filing members, as opposed to from law enforcement or the Home Office or anywhere like that. 5 years ago, that was about 18,000. 5 years before that, it was about 14,000. So that gives you a feel. The volume of fraud the volume of fraud that is reported to us is still increasing. The volume of fraud that goes unreported is phenomenally higher than the figures we have. Nobody knows is the problem, isn't it?
But why do you think fraud has increased, just in general? What's your perception on that?
Because it's so easy to do it. I mean, that's the awful thing, isn't it? Is that because I work in counter fraud, the really horrible thing is, of course, we all know how easy it is to commit fraud. And I think the reason that it has grown, partly it is because we've got more members, so we're getting more of the data coming in. But I think one of the underlying problems is that, like, for example, when the economy is in hard times, there will be people who will just realise they can do something. They could even morally in their own minds say, actually, it is acceptable because it's the difference between feeding my family or not. It's the difference between taking my family on holiday or not. And they would lose sight of, actually, because there's fraud rings. There's the really ghastly, horrible criminal fraud element, but there is also fraud that is dishonesty, but it's the sort of first-party chancer fraud rather than the criminal activity fraud, and our database is for both of those types of fraud.
Thank you. I have a question from Paula in Ireland. Why is the service not available in other markets? For instance, in Ireland, obviously, including Northern Ireland.
It is in Northern Ireland, and actually we do have some Irish banks. So when we do our regional meetings in Ireland, we do them actually between Dublin and Belfast, but we only cover the UK because our board have always taken the view that for CIFAS to go outside of the UK, the investment that would be required, it would take us onto a whole new plane. The South African Fraud Prevention Service, they have a model very much like our model, and they came and they worked with us very closely to look at our model. And that's where, I was saying earlier, again, if there were countries where you would say, we would like to do something and we are interested in talking to you, we're not necessarily going to do your model, but we're interested because your model obviously has sat there in the UK and done the job for a while, we would be happy to do so. But our board, their ambition at the moment still is to do more of what we do well in the UK. We really want to get public sector data. Rather than to take the model as it is now and to expand it worldwide. It's not where our board's ambition is.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to post in the chat box, or if you'd like to shout out? Darius
has got one. Do you have any stats on what fraudsters are immigrants from Eastern Europe? We possibly do. We wouldn't release them. The Home Office information, that is telling you, but as I say, we would not release that data per se, if you like. Does that make sense? It would be for the Home Office if they wanted to do it, because it's their data.
Anyone else? Everybody's asking by chat box today. Okay.
I maybe have one question regarding the matching of individuals in the UK. How accurate are your matching methods?
Well, it's interesting. I was saying in the presentation that the Experian, Equifax, Call Credits and Ectics, they all implement the data matching rules on their systems, and we obviously do it within our system. So what you do see is, because we don't have unique identifiers in the UK, the way we all do it is slightly differently. So there is a core in the middle that we will all return, but there are scenarios where we will each, on the fringes, return things. Some go wider than others, some go narrower. So how accurate it is, I think my politically correct answer to that question would be, we are as accurate as we can be, given we don't have a unique identifier in the UK that we can hold all the data under. But it does vary between all of us how we do it. I think because we don't have unique identifiers in the UK, and we never have, and certainly having worked at Experian, but I think it's true of the other credit reference agencies in the UK as well, they actually don't do a bad job. They actually do a very, very good job. But sometimes there will be things where an individual will complain and say, that is unfair, and we will always investigate that within our complaints policy.
Okay. Well, I think that's all for today. Thank you ever so much, Sue. That was really interesting and very enjoyable. A lot of food for thought. And if anybody does have questions, as Sue mentioned, you can see her email on the screen, and you do have a bio as well, so you can get the contact details from there. So, Sue, thank you so much, and as I said, look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you, Emma.
Okay. Thank you ever so much, everybody. The recording will be online if you did miss anything. So, yeah, we'll be in touch. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.